Elisa Parker, we're broadcasting live here from the Wild and Scenic Film Fest in the Media Lounge at the Nevada City Winery. It's great to be with you this afternoon. You know, Wild and Scenic Film Fest brings together thousands of social change makers, activists, and then the filmmakers, those who are telling the stories that we often don't hear, but it's so important to hear about. I'm excited to introduce our next guest. We have Windy Borman with us, and the film is called MaryJanes, Women of Weed, and which definitely, here in Nevada City and Grass Valley, we have a lot of growers here, and I'm always about anytime we are empowering women and telling the stories of women who are taking the lead. So welcome, Windy, first of all.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you here. So I know you've actually created several films. We'll talk about those in a minute. But first of all, tell us about this film and what was your motivation behind creating this in the first place?
Yeah. Well, in 2014, I moved to Colorado, and I was not a cannabis user, but in Colorado, you can't help but hear about these amazing stories of women having such success in the industry. So that was enough to make me curious, and what really made me decide to grab the camera and start filming was I heard this statistic that 36% of senior leadership in the cannabis industry is women. And when you compare that to the national average of 20%, that's a big increase. So there's something about cannabis that was drawing a lot of women to it to create businesses.
What do you think that was now that you've created this film?
Well, there's a couple reasons why I think women are coming to cannabis. One of them is they get to create the industry the right way from the ground up, So you don't have to necessarily deal with a negative corporate culture or something that's taking advantage of people or the environment and things like that. So you could do it right from the get-go, basically. I think the other thing for women is, honestly, we're smart. We can see that it's a great opportunity and we're going to jump at that as well. So it's not limited to wealthy men, women, people of color, people from the LGBTQ community. They helped the cannabis movement, and it would be a real shame if they weren't involved as the entrepreneurs. And so thankfully, they're finding success in the industry, and at that point I decided to start filming.
Well, and also talk about the opportunity. I'm glad you brought that up, Windy, around systemic change. And when we are in the process of creating something new, what an opportunity for, especially for women, to step into that in an area in a field that might not have so many boundaries initially. Of course, there were legal boundaries at certain times, but this really is an opportunity for women to step into something.
Exactly.
And also be financially independent.
Exactly.
It's a big deal.
It's a wonderful opportunity to really change the wealth disparity in this country too, if we do it right. Wealthy old white men like to give money to other rich white men, right? That's the typical model. And we saw what happened with the tech startup industry. Initially women and people of color were right there, and it turned into a bunch of white guys in hoodies and garages, right? So we're at a key point right now where we need to make sure that we do have a level playing field for all people to come into cannabis, including people that have been, targeted by the racist drug war. I mean, we've used that as a way to keep locking up Black and brown people. So they are going to have more criminal records, right? So California did a great thing where they are allowing people to get those records expunged or overturn those charges. And there's also equity programs that are giving business training to people that have, misdemeanors or felonies for drug possession charges. And they're allowing them to start businesses in this industry.
Right. So you step into this, as you said, as somewhat of an outsider.
Yeah.
What were the myths or the stories that you told yourself around this and this industry? And then what did you discover around that to actually debunk those?
Yeah. Well, I'm a product of the DARE generation. I grew up under Just Say No. It's a gateway drug, and there's actually drug addiction in my family. So I never wanted to flip that genetic switch by trying marijuana. And as I started doing the research on this film and talking to more women and hearing these stories about, helping veterans with PTSD or children with epilepsy and cancer and, all of these different things, I slowly started to peel away. But what surprised me the most was how hard my brain just wanted to latch onto that story. It took over a year of filming. And sorry to give away the ending of the film, but I'm actually comfortable enough around cannabis by the end of the film that I try it for the first time on camera.
What was that experience like for you? And also to be very public and on camera is putting yourself out there.
Yeah,
for sure,
I mean, this is my third documentary, but the first one that I decided to be an on-camera character, right? To kind of go on this journey. And I just realized that if I was vulnerable and really honest, that I felt like I could win the audience over and they would go on that journey with me. And there's this wonderful moments in the film where you see me struggling with things and like questioning certain things. And there's even applause lines, right? Because there's the people who are like me, maybe they've never tried cannabis before, going, yeah, I've heard that too, or yeah, somebody told me that, or I have that question. And then you've got the other people in the industry who are just kind of waiting for me to get it. And so once all those things come together, like the audience usually erupts in applause of like, she's turned the corner. Like, the lights are going on. Mm-hmm. So I just felt that this was a new, authentic look at this story. There's a lot of stoner films out there. They're usually about a bunch of stoner dudes, and they go on some misadventure and, it's a bunch of like easy stoner jokes. And that's not this film.
Right. And also I've noticed too, just even with women, for example, like we were speaking with my sister who's here and involved in the industry. Mm-hmm. There is the intention around medicine, healing, like you said, and working with people who have cancer, people that have epilepsy, people that have autism, for example. So it's all of those different areas. There's that sense of intention as women as we see anyway, just in nonprofits, for example, right? Women start nonprofits because they care deeply about something.
And we bring compassion and this health and wellness perspective to cannabis. This isn't about let's get as messed up as possible, and get stuck on the couch. This is what's a health and wellness product that can maybe take away pain or deal with some negative symptoms or, treat an illness, help my child, help my parents. And we're looking at cannabis for those reasons. And so we're creating products that speak to the female consumer.
That's right. So tell us real quick about one of your favorite stories, one of the subjects or characters in the film that you connected with.
Yeah. Well, the character that stood out the most to me and actually really helped me is Betty Aldworth. She's the executive director for Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And I got to know her initially off camera, and I decided I have to follow this woman. She's taking 2 busloads of students to Washington, D.C. to demonstrate, she's taking 2 busloads of students to New York City to protest outside of the United Nations because they're talking about cannabis, how a lot of countries are legalizing it, and yet there's other parts of the world where they're still locking people up and sending them to jail, right? So at some point, the United Nations is going to have to weigh in. They ultimately didn't in 2016, but just being around her and being around the youth saying, no, there's a better way to do this. Our current drug policy doesn't make sense. We need to end this and start making sense. Like, that is when I really turned the corner.
Last question is, Wendy, the theme this year at Wild and Scenic is around groundswell, right? So rising up, I usually picture it as this rising up through the mud and then the emergence, and we're also doing that together. But what has that meant for you this year in particular? And maybe that's in relation to the work you're doing with the film or something even beyond that.
Well, cannabis is a conversation that needs to happen on the community level, right? It needs to go town by town, state by state, and eventually get up to the federal government. And right now we have a government that really has stuck their head in the sand on this, and they're trying to actually turn back the tide. Well, cannabis is already here, and it brings a lot of people together. It's liberals and conservatives. There's people who believe in being able to choose what they put in their bodies, and there's also people who believe in states' rights. And we're coming together And I really feel that it's up to us to educate the federal government. And I think the good thing about Jeff Sessions trying to roll us back to the war on drugs is that it might actually empower Congress to do something and make cannabis federally legal once and for all.
Right. So true. So true. And right here in Nevada City, Grass Valley area in Nevada County, as you may or may not know, we have a very active community that's aligned around cannabis. Mm-hmm. Women Who Grow is certainly one of those. It certainly brought our community together in electing one of our for a long time progressive female candidates as county supervisor. So there's a lot to be said for that. Where can folks go to find more information about the film?
Well, you go to our handy dandy website. It's MaryJanesFilm.com, and on social media we're at MaryJanes Film. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you so much, Wendy,
Thank
for
you.
being part of this. I'm Elisa Parker. It's the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. We'll be right back. Thanks, Wendy. That was awesome.
Thank you. Good.